Come along with us as we explore the broad world of preservation and the work being done to preserve, interpret, and save our past in a 21st century world. From aquaculture to historic foodways to forensic modeling, we're talking weekly with experts from across the globe. This is your host, Nick Redding. Welcome to PreserveCast. This is Nick Redding, and you're listening to PreserveCast. Today, we're really excited to be sitting down with Vedet Coleman-Robinson, who serves as the CEO of the Association of African American Museums here in the United States. And they have an important conference coming up, but more to the point, they do some amazing work and bring together a collaborative of organizations all across the country that tell a really rich and critical part of the American story. And so we want to get to know all about that. But I know that Vedet has a really cool background and story and how she got into all of this. And like most interviews, we want to start there in understanding a little bit about the person that we're talking to. So Vedet, what's your story? Where did you grow up and why did it occur to you that you wanted to get into this line of work?
Well, first and foremost, thank you, Nick, for having me. I truly appreciate you. So how my whole life started, well, at least in this field, I grew up in New Jersey, and where I was, I grew up in a multicultural area, which is Hamilton, New Jersey. It's off of exit 7A for anybody who's familiar. And that's the Great Adventure and the Shores exit. My neighborhood was very my schools were very multicultural, but my neighborhood, I lived in an African American enclave. So what that meant is I was not allowed to ever forget the people who paved ways for us, civil rights leaders. Every year we had to do, book reports on, and this was connected to the church. And then also our school librarian was African American. So she made sure that, we just knew our history. So every year we had to do book reports on notable African American figures that we've never heard of. And that was kind of difficult because, your school system, usually you're learning about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks and things of that nature. But the really cool thing about it is, there was Encyclopedia Britannica back in the day. This is obviously before Google. And we had a very rich community center in which had African American books on notable African Americans. So we were able to go over there and, conduct research and do our book reports. And then I started helping out with Black History Month programs from middle school all the way through high school. And that was really great. And then after I graduated from high school, I went on to Virginia State University, which is a historically Black college and university in Petersburg, Virginia. And I really wanted to go to an HBCU because I wanted to be connected to former enslaved individuals in a way that I did not have in New Jersey. So the beauty of going to an HBCU is you get to know who the founders are immediately, who the first class was immediately, and all of those individuals who graced that campus were formerly enslaved or, the first generation after emancipation. So it was a beautiful thing. And while I was there, I started working in the archives pretty early on. And my job was, and this is, of course, again, I'm back in the day, but my job was to start digitizing some of our papers. And then I also was in charge of doing curating the Founders Day exhibits as well as the homecoming exhibits. So I did that from, I want to say like maybe my sophomore year all the way through my senior year. And the beauty of that was, I would tell my friends like, oh yeah, you got to check out this exhibit I did. And obviously the history department cared, but my friends who were not historians were like, we want to party. it's homecoming. Why are you talking about that stuff? But what I learned throughout this whole process was the alumni cared and the funders cared. And that, and also obviously the presidents cared. And the thing that I loved about that was just, their connectivity to the past, whether it was their immediate past because they were part of, getting Virginia State up and running. When I say up and running, I mean like and maybe in the 20th century, changing it to make it the university instead of the college. It started off as Virginia State College. And it was just their connectivity. So I really fell in love with the fact that you basically travel back in time for a brief minute with those individuals. And it made us all human. And then after I left, not left, but after I graduated Virginia State, I went on to Rutgers for a year. And that's where I met Dr. Clement Price. He was a phenomenal public historian. And he was my advisor at the time. And I remember telling him one day, I said, Dr. Price, I love what we're doing in public history, but I don't think I belong at Rutgers. And he kind of just looked at me like, what are you talking about? You belong here. And I said, I don't think this is my home. I think I need to be way closer to all of the cultural things. And, while New Jersey has cultural things, they didn't have African-American cultural things back then, not to the extent that I needed them. So he, along with my new advisor at Howard, allowed me to transfer. And it was during that time that I met now Secretary Lonnie Bunch and Dr. Spencer Crew and Giles Wright and some really, really great public historians and historians from New Jersey. Then I came down to Howard and just hit the ground running. In my first position, my first internship, which turned into a job, was helping the National Park Service acquire, back then it was called the U.S. Colored Troops Monument, and now it's the African American Civil War Monument on U Street in D.C. That was my first job, was to help Dr. Frank Smith get that monument into the National Park Service, and then from there we just hit the ground running. Every doors just started opening for me very quickly. I remember calling, just, for the Maryland listeners, I remember calling around and looking at Yahoo and trying to find African-American museums. And a lot of them, they were open, but they were not trying to take on an intern, even though I was trying to, work for free. It was just the capacity. We don't have the capacity for an intern right now. And I just one day I was about to give up, and I did another search on Yahoo, and the Reginald F. Lewis Museum of Maryland, African American History and Culture popped up. And I called them and I said, I just want to know if you're looking for interns, I'm willing to work. And they said, oh, sure, you can come up here. So I would drive all the way from PG County to Baltimore City at least 3 times a week, and sometimes on fumes. On gas fumes, because I really, you just try to make things work. But it was just such an enriching experience. I got to learn how to open up a museum. That museum at the time was brand spanking new, and I was helping them with with all of the pieces of the grand opening. And then I was very fortunate to have a few community exhibits at the Reginald F. Lewis Museum as well. So that's the start. And then I got a job back at National Park Service as a grants management specialist. And I was there for 11 years before starting at AAAM. So I hope I didn't bore you with all that background, but
no, I think it's valuable. I mean, it's so interesting. I feel like we could we could do some type of map of all the people that we've talked to and all the
Yeah.
different paths that they have. And some people are more, you sort of seem like you're on almost like a direct path where there was like this spark moment. I don't know if we've had a book report listed as like maybe one of those moments. And I am curious, since you are, I wouldn't ask this if you weren't in sort of the public history museum field. Did you have experiences as a child going to museums where you enjoyed that, or did that come later? Because I mean, now you're leading this organization that supports all of that. Is that in part because you loved it, or in part because it was missing?
Both. So when I where I was raised, we weren't too far from Philly, so a lot of the times I was at the Franklin Institute. And the beauty about the Franklin Institute is, while it's a science center, they always had exhibits up that were, history related, or human related, I should say, just about humanity. The art museums didn't really speak to me when I was younger because they were so stoic. I'm a big personality. I wasn't allowed to speak in there. Art museums were very similar to libraries for me. I just and also, funny story, I wasn't allowed to be an archivist. My advisor at the time, or my boss at Virginia State, said, "Your personality is too big for the archives, girl. People are coming in here, they're trying to do their research, and you're talking to them about their research and how you could flip it into an exhibit, and they're just trying to get in and get out." So I was not able to be an archivist. But yeah, so but arts and culture was always part of my background, but more importantly, research. My family has we have some property in South Carolina, and I say that now, like, property, but literally my grandfather's great uncle was the founder of an African American junior college in Trenton, South Carolina. And I didn't really know what it was growing up. I just knew that my great grandparents always, they lived in Bristol because my great grandfather helped build Levittown. He wasn't allowed to live there, but he helped build it. And I just remember they were always talking about this space, and we're going to start this museum, and it's going to get on the National Register. And I didn't know what any of those things were, but I did know that they made me do some research. So it was a big part of my life. I did have a detour. I mean, when I was in college, I worked for Educational Testing Service during my breaks. And I was a software quality assurance analyst, of all things. I had no business being there, but I did a good job. I was a great worker. It just was not until they started telling me that I had to go back to school for coding that I said, "Oh, that's not going to work. I'll just go to Rutgers." So I did do a detour in, I guess it was still nonprofit, but kind of more corporate, before I came back to the cultural space. But the spark really for me was really just learning about my family's history, kind of out of necessity. I wasn't allowed to not know. And then, as you're learning your history, when you're younger, you're like, "Oh, there's other people out there just like me," right? And then you're looking for your people. So I guess in search of looking for my people, I wound up finding this field.
Yeah, it's so interesting too, because the way you describe that now, talking about looking for your people, you've found your people, and now you run an organization that helps other people find their people, right? I mean, it's
Yes.
sort of full circle. So maybe that's a good way to kind of start talking about the Association of African American Museums. Tell us a little bit about the background of it, and we'll talk about sort of your role with it and how you came to it. But how does this all come together? What's the story of it, and what is this organization?
So the Association of African American Museums was established in 1978. It basically was birthed out of the Black arts protest movement. So what that meant was there were a whole bunch of Black artists and Black historians that were not seeing themselves in what we would call a traditional space, which was which made sense because that was my life as well. So 78, I was born in 79. So I am a Gen Xer by age or date. But you wind up not seeing yourself in spaces. So what wound up happening is, there were 3 to 5 um, executive directors of who were founding directors of museums that came together as a conglomerate to uh, form AAAM, and it was done out of necessity. And the beautiful thing about that was, and we stayed true to that mission even today. And it wasn't like a sound written mission; it was just something that was ingrained. Um, all of our founders, when they got together, Nick, would each one teach one, reach one. So we had John Kennard, who was part of that conglomerate, who was the founding director of the Smithsonian's Anacostia Community Museum. So when he would convene with the group, which we also had the founder of the Charles Wright Museum in Detroit, who is Charles Wright. He's one of our founders, and then Dr. Margaret Burroughs, who was of the DeSable Museum. When they all came together, John Franklin would bring practices that he learned from the Smithsonian to this conglomerate, and then they would start implementing things that made sense for them, because not everything, although it's a museum, our museums are a little different because they're way smaller. But the Anacostia Community Museum, the reason that was so important for, our keystone as AAAM is the fact that that was a community museum. So all of our museums, all of the African American museums are servants to the communities in which they reside in. So back in the day, a lot of and I shouldn't say back in the day because it still happens now, a lot of our museums are birthed in the community and are of the community and for the community. So they are literally hubs in a community because they're collecting from the community, they're interpreting from the community, they're doing public programs for the community and things of that nature. And sometimes our museums also double up as like community centers, spaces of for rapid response things. When there's civil unrest, people come to our museums just to learn, and then also have a voice. I think that's the most important thing. But the beauty in all of that is I can share a couple of one story in particular. Let's fast forward to basically, you could look at all of the riots that happen in the African American community, but let's speak specifically about the murder of George Floyd and the National Civil Rights Museum. We were shut down during COVID during that time, right? And that community decided that they were going to have a march, peaceful march from the State House or the city, the mayor's office back to the National Civil Rights Museum. And to me, that just spoke volumes. They started at a place and ended at the museum. And the reason that they ended at the museum is because the museum is a sacred space. And the museums are always really protected in those communities. There could be, riots happening around it, things going in demise around them. But usually the historically Black colleges that are in communities, as well as the churches, the Black museums, the African American museums, are unfazed because the community is trying to protect them.
Maybe we can just kind of drill into, that's sort of a really sort of beautiful way of kind of describing the philosophy of it. And I think that's really interesting for people to think about, for all listeners to think about how museums, this is one, segment, and an important segment of museums in America, but it would be beautiful if all museums were that integral to their communities. And I suppose many are. But let's talk like just sort of like nuts and bolts. How many are there? I think people will be surprised to know. How many members do you have? and it seems like it's a growing thing. Like it's a very
Yes.
vibrant and healthy organization, under your leadership.
Oh, thank you, Nick. Yeah, so just quickly, our mission is, to help promote and give professional development to African American museum professionals or those that are working. You don't have to be African American. You can work in an African American focused museum. So that's number one. Number two is when I started, we had 347 members. And now we are at 1,300. And the reason for that growth, the
Wow.
reason for that growth, thank you. Thank you. The reason for that growth is because, we just really made sure to help find everybody. Where are our people? That's truly, that I feel like that was my campaign for life. It's just, where are our people? And we did like a rigorous trying to find everybody. Then COVID happened, but it was easier to find folks because they were at home. So we were we were calling and emailing. So right now, of the 1,300 members we probably have about a little bit over 350 museums. And our museums are as small as a one-person museum and as large as the National Museum of African American History and Culture. So you have everything in between. And then we also have museums without walls. So we have a lot of museums that were birthed during COVID who made sure to flip their collections online. So that's the beauty, because they have way more foot traffic than a lot of other folks, because they were able to be nimble and either start virtually or because of what COVID was doing to our field writ large. They moved from bricks and mortar online to an online area. So those are our members, and it's all across the country. I like to say from sea to shining sea. And then also we have some members that are international. So we have some members in Canada, throughout the Caribbean. We have a couple in Africa. And I just learned that we have a member in Japan. So I'm trying to figure out, they signed up as an institutional member, but I'm trying to figure out, is that going to be an African museum in Japan? I need to figure that one out. I don't know how what it is, but we do service.
You'll have to do a site visit to really understand it, Vedet. I mean,
I absolutely will.
I want to encourage your board to put you on a plane to Japan to figure that story
Thank
out,
you.
and then come back to us and tell us all about it. So
research purposes.
Yes, exactly. You really are going to need to dig into that story. So, I want to get into the conference that's coming up, and want to encourage people and listeners to attend. I mean, I think it's going to be you have pretty amazing conference put together. But before we get there, what is the future of this field look like? What is your optimistic vision for this field? Where is it headed? I know you're providing professional development, but you're also providing leadership for this field.
Yes.
What does the growth look like? What are you hoping, your kids would be able to, and I say that because I know you have a child, I'm not just guessing, but what are you hoping for the next generation to inherit when it comes to African American museums?
Oh, that's a tall order. I want them to inherit legacy, and just, we have a strong foundation. I usually tell anybody who will listen, that the Association of African American Museums is very similar to our African American focused museums. So when I came here, what I learned very quickly is we had a very strong foundation, but we did need to start repointing some things. We did need to make sure that, mortar was where it was, where we're supposed to be. We did have to make sure that the roof, the shingles were right where they need to be to protect the organization, that the basement was sealed, all the things that you can think of for home improvement. We had to do that when I started in 2019. And I guess what I want the future generations to have is just something that's sound. And then also to understand succession planning. I think that that's something that we don't really think about in our field writ large, right? Because we're so focused on the today that we don't really look ahead and say, well, who's going to take the reins and, make this something beautiful. But also hope that they inherit pride of what we've done, and just take the baton and make it their own. I'm a visionary person, so I really do like to see things that are implemented that work for the now, and then what's going to happen 5-10 years ahead. So I hope that they're able to do all of the things. I hope that there are no restrictions on what they're able to do. That's what I would want for the future.
I think I think you need to put that on a bumper sticker. I don't know exactly how you can get it on there, but I like that. I think that that's a really beautiful vision for the future. And I also like that piece about just kind of teasing that out, about succession planning. That's like a very, you had sort of the lofty piece, and then you had sort of and here's something you actually really should be thinking about. And I'm probably going to mispronounce the word, but it's like ego dystonic. It's like it kind of is contrary to our egos. We don't like to think about what comes next.
Yeah, you're correct.
And I think that that's a really important thing for us to kind of work against. So the conference is coming up. How long have you been doing conferences? When is it? Where is it? And how do people register?
Yeah, so our first conference was in 1978. So we've been doing it for 46 years. And we've stayed true to form for majority of the time. We've elevated it a little bit over the years. So this year we're in Baltimore. We're coming back to Baltimore. We were here in 2012. And we're coming back because when I pitched it to the board, I said, how can we not be here when we have the first, whether he's able to come or not, we have the first African-American governor in Maryland. There are 4 historically Black colleges and universities in Maryland. We have the privilege of having over 10 to 15 African-American museums that we know of, because, we still are looking for people, still doing that search. Still looking for our people. I should make that a documentary now that I think about it. But, we have about 10 to 15 museums definitely in this whole state that are members. And folks are coming every day. So this conference will be at the Hilton Inner Harbor, August 13th through the 16th. The 13th are all pre-conference workshops. And then we kick it off on the 14th with our opening plenary with Dr. Carla Hayden, who is the Library of Congress librarian. Her term is about to end. So she was appointed by President Obama. So her term is about to end, but we wanted to bring her back. She was with us back when we were in DC as a keynote, as our keynote. But we wanted to bring her back because, she is the reason why Enoch Pratt has changed so much, the Enoch Pratt library system. And the thing that I love about Enoch Pratt is it's almost, this is yours. It's not, this is our library. This is your establishment. So I love what she did there.
And just so everyone knows, just for listeners, Enoch Pratt is the library in Baltimore.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, that's fine. I wanted people to know, because you're right. It's a fantastic, and they just went through, from a preservation standpoint, a beautiful restoration and rehabilitation of the building. It is an absolutely gorgeous building. And you're right. I go to a lot of different libraries. I have a young child as well, and get to see different libraries and enjoy different places. And Enoch Pratt is unique in the way that it sees its visitors. It meets everyone where they're at.
Yes. You are absolutely correct. And the one downtown obviously, with that being headquarters, is just amazing. But it's throughout the whole library system. I used to live in the West Forest Park area a while back, almost a decade back, and that particular site was also, it had the same values and all of the things. From a corporate standpoint, as far as branding is concerned, it did an amazing job. I did not feel like I was separated at all. So we're bringing her back. She's going to do our opening plenary. The President Jenkins of Coppin State University is going to interview and moderate that discussion. And then we have a lot of Maryland civil rights activists, who we will have on our luncheon plenaries every day. The one that, in addition to Dr. Hayden, that I'm really excited about is we're doing this curated plenary with Morgan State University, and this plenary will have a gentleman on there who actually sat in the courtroom when Thurgood Marshall defended Brown versus Board of Education. So this year's conference theme is basically the legacy of the Civil Rights Act. We are also highlighting Brown versus Board of Education because that's it's a milestone year for them as well, for that legislation as well. And also freedom riders, all of those people who risked their lives to make sure that we were able to vote. So all of that will be highlighted during conference from the 14th through the 16th. And then on the 17th, we're going to Annapolis to do a tour, a waterway tour, to learn about African Americans on the Chesapeake. So we're really excited about all of the things that are going on this year.
Yeah, well, I can't think of a better place than Maryland to host this. I'm sure there's other good ones, but this is a
Yes.
this is a pretty good one. You and I are both biased to
Yes.
that. I think it's also interesting too how you focus in on sort of these living legacies and individuals, and making sure people don't forget that. I feel like there's something to be learned there for other museum associations. You don't see that quite as much.
Yeah.
And I feel like the work of the Association of African American Museums is something that everyone should be watching and looking towards, because it's just such authentic storytelling, and viewing community and museum as one thing, which I think the whole field, like you keep saying, kind of like when there's these issues that address the whole field, that's something that the whole field should be looking to. And your leadership obviously is something people should be watching. So we'll put a link in the show notes so that people can register, get there, get to meet you in person. And also, I'm curious, like, what's next if someone can't make it to the conference? I'm sure there's tons of resources. I know there are because I've been on your website, but there's tons of resources there. Where else would you encourage people to visit? What else do you want people to know about?
Yeah, so I always say, number one, become a member, because there are things that we have for members that aren't forward facing on the website that we share. So, for instance, we have a partnership with Howard University's Business School, and we have an advanced executive leadership training. It's a 4-day training that happens every spring. This upcoming year, 2025, will be the third year that we've done it. And it's funded by IMLS. So we're really excited to be able to have that grant to have one additional service for our members. The beauty of that program, though, Nick, is in our first iteration, over 89% of the graduates are in leadership positions today. It was a very intensive training, but all of them have either elevated in their roles in their respective organizations, or they left the organization and were elevated to a leadership role. Some of them are at the helm of some really great organizations, but I always say become a member, because that just gets you to be connected. So Our website is www.blackmuseums.org. And if you click on join, there's a link, a drop down to become a member. But that's the best way to get connected to us. And then, we have conferences every year. That's our big flagship event. And we just travel the country. This year, I was just very fortunate to be able to ask very nicely if we could do Maryland. But next year we'll be in Charleston to celebrate the opening of the International African American Museum. And I'm comfortable saying that because I've already signed the contract and it's going in the program booklet. I don't, it's okay. It's
so
okay.
You heard it here first. We're breaking news, and what another great place to visit with you.
We're really excited. We're really excited. But yeah, so that's what that is and as far as registering for conference, same thing. Go to the website, click on the conference link. And then, there's a registration drop down. And this year we're also doing, we always do on-site registration. So that's not a really big problem. So if folks are local or they're, willing to travel, they can, register directly on site at the Hilton.
That's great to know, because we do actually have, not surprisingly, a lot of local listeners. So this is a great opportunity in your backyard, no matter the type of museum or history organization you work in, and especially if you work in an African-American institution. So the question that normally people hate the most, which is, what's your favorite historic place or site? And oftentimes now we kind of bend it a little bit and say, what's your favorite that you visited recently? Because people just don't want to be put on the spot like that.
Well, I don't mind because, I was just going to tell you that all of my museums are my favorite. But I guess I truly, if I had to pick one, and I know that this is kind of biased, but it would be the Biddle Hall Museum in Trenton, South Carolina, because I was able to cut my teeth there. And it's attached directly to my family. And you don't really get a chance to see that, right? So Biddle Hall was one of the halls for Bettis Academy. And when, oddly enough, when Brown versus Board of Education was passed, Bettis Academy had to close because now their students were getting bused into the city, and it just couldn't sustain itself. So, what my family did, as well as the community, folks who graduated from the school, they turned the school into a Christian Leadership Institute, which was kind of like, it was, not really said all the time, but the Mount Canaan Association, which is down there, which was also founded by John Bettis, had people like, Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune come through the campus, and also Booker T. Washington, folks who were establishing their own HBCUs were coming to the school to kind of see what they were doing, but also to go to this the Christian Leadership Conference. So it's really beautiful. So if I had to pick one, I would go with the one that's biased, so I won't get in trouble by my family or anybody else. And I'll stick with that one.
Well, I don't think we've ever had that before, because I don't think anyone I've ever interviewed's family has a museum, tied to it. And what a cool part of the story. But sorry, I interrupted you.
It's okay. That it would be that Virginia State University and Howard, because as far as I'm concerned, those are also sites of memory and commemoration. And they both have museums on their campus as well. So I'll just play it safe. Nobody can yell at me for those.
No. Well, it has been an absolute pleasure to get to know your story a little bit more and bring that story to our listeners. I encourage people to learn more about the organization, get to the conference if you can. And if you can't get this year's, then see them in Charleston next year. And anytime you want to come back and tell us about something you're working on, there's an open door here. So thank you so much, Vedet.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nick. I appreciate you.
Thanks for listening to PreserveCast. To dig deeper into this episode's story, head over to preservecast.org for show notes and our collection of previous episodes. Don't forget to engage with this podcast by subscribing, commenting, and leaving a review. Follow along on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at PreserveCast for even more. PreserveCast is currently recorded in Walkersville, Maryland, and sponsored by the 1772 Foundation, and powered by Preservation Maryland. Thanks for listening, and keep on preserving.